We started a little mini series of sorts back in October of 2022 with an in-person event that we call the Learning Circuit. And that day we talked all about disaster preparedness. And I know we had several hundred people from around the state gather at those different locations. But in case you are just joining us, the theme that day, as I said, was disaster preparedness. And we launched this kind of series throughout the fall here. So our theme throughout 2022 has been make room for yes. And why are we talking about disaster preparedness when we're talking about making room for yes? Well, often we can say we're better prepared to make room for yes when we've done a little bit of prep work on the front end. And so when we have strong plans in place to handle disasters and emergencies, our lives aren't quite so disrupted if and when they do occur. So today's webinar is kind of thinking through that planning process. We've called it Now What? Caring for Self, Staff, and Community After a Disaster. And Becky Heil kind of knocked these slides together for me and then got the cold of the decade, and so put me in charge of this webinar today. But she found this picture of a group of people caring for one part of their community, that tiny little puppy you can see up there perched on that roof, who's in need of a rescue. So pets are also a type of our community, a part of our community in one small way or another. But today we really are going to be focusing with our panelists on taking care of yourself, your staff, and that community at large after a large-scale disaster does occur. So I am not going to go out to this website right now. I want to make sure we have time for our panelists. If we have time at the end, I may come back to it. But as part of this process, we put together the disaster planning toolkit, which you can access at that link on the screen, or nab that QR code as well. At some point, I will put a link to the toolkit in the chat as well. This basically just a collection of resources that we've gathered since the Learning Circuit and over the course of the last few months related to planning and preparing for disasters. So the recording from today's webinar will be posted in that toolkit, as will other resources that are related. So you can click on that link or you can access that link at any time. And like I say, if we have time at the end, I'll come back and share that toolkit a little bit. This is kind of where we've been and where we're going. So we had a panel of librarians, as well as a session specifically for library boards that have already happened today. Obviously, December 7, we're talking about supporting self, staff, and community. And then make plans next week to attend a Salvage 101 webinar with someone from the I'm Alert team. I'm Alert standing for Iowa. Nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm Alert. I'll put the link to them in the chat. But basically, they are a group dedicated to helping you salvage collections and records after a disaster. And so a member of their team will be kind of giving some basic advice on how to do that. So I've mentioned our panel today. Hope Decker, who's done work with the Rural Libraries and Social Wellbeing Project, will start first. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves kind of as we go. I don't need to take time to do that right now. But we are also joined by Bobbi Newman from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, based in the Iowa City area. And then my fellow state employee from the Department of Health and Human Services Disaster Behavioral Health Team, Karen Hyatt. And so Hope Decker and Bobbi Newman are each going to take about 25 minutes to kind of talk through some sort of general resources and support ideas that they have in their work. And then Karen will be addressing sort of specifically what the Disaster Behavioral Health Team through the state does. So Hope, at this point, I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Samantha, and thank you all for coming. I'm excited to see 53 participants. That's exciting. Okay. Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
We are. Looks great.
Okay, great. I am a researcher on the Social Wellbeing and Rural Libraries Project, but I am also a librarian in a rural library. And oh, there we go. Good. That's not, oops. Sorry, everyone. It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar if somebody didn't have a little technical glitch. Can everybody see my whole screen? Is that okay?
Yep, we see your slides, the whole
Okay.
slides.
Something's weird with my second monitor, so I'm only seeing like 3/4 of it.
Oh,
This is the region of New York where my library is located. You can see these long, deep lakes, lots of great hiking opportunities. I love where I live. The library is in Wayland, New York, and you can see a little picture on the bottom. The library was built in 1972, and when it was built, people didn't know what was going up, but they were very excited because they thought it was a McDonald's. It actually obviously is a library, and I think people are okay with it not being a McDonald's. I think they got over that. I also, in addition to being a director of a small rural library, am a researcher on the Rural Libraries and Social Wellbeing Project, which asks the question, do rural libraries impact the social well-being of their communities? And if so, how? And we went into 8 case study communities from across the country. This is a photograph from Missouri, Iowa. I spent almost a week in 4 locations, and my other 2 researchers went into the other 4. And we asked community members to talk about their ideal community and talk about their lives. How does the library impact their lives? And I heard the most beautiful stories. And we worked with these 4 librarians from across the country. Chelsea, down at the bottom, is from Missouri, Iowa, but they're also from Wisconsin, Mississippi, West Virginia, Idaho, Vermont, New York, Iowa, of course, and New Mexico. And after we went into the communities, talked to community members, recorded lots and lots of hours of conversations, came back with a stack of quotes from community members that probably, I don't know, was like 2 or 3 inches thick. It seemed immense to me. We sorted through those and found trends that kept coming up. People wanted to belong. They wanted to feel known. They wanted information, of course, as you would expect, but there was such an important social aspect. And in rural communities, people also want to enjoy the outdoors. They're very connected to the outdoors. When I was in Iowa, people talked about their farming lives, how when somebody was injured in a tractor accident and the community just came together in Missouri and brought meals and helped with the harvest. And these kinds of things are probably what you would expect. You see that over and over again in small communities and rural communities where people feel like they belong to each other. There is this connection. So we are, as librarians, really well positioned to help our communities in times of disasters. These rural librarians that you see on the screen helped us take the research and make some practical tools that other rural librarians can use. And if you're from a city in Iowa, if you're from Des Moines, I think you will find these tools valuable as well. Although they're written by rural librarians for rural librarians, they are also things that I think anybody can benefit from. So after these 8, actually it was 7 that were able to participate, made the tools. And the tools are self-reflective questions mostly. Sometimes they're checklists. There are about 20 of them, and I'll show them to you in a minute. After those tools were made, based on the research, based on what we looked at and those trends that we kept seeing over and over again, we asked people from across the country to test them out. We used the feedback to refine them, and we kept in contact about things that were working, things that didn't. It was a pretty intensive process. And then after it was all set, we had a little money because it was now in the middle of the pandemic and nobody was traveling to do presentations. So we had the money that we had left over from the MLS grant, MLIS grant. Oh gosh, I don't remember the Museum of Libraries.
IMLS.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, how embarrassing. We had a little money left over, so instead of doing webinars, I developed a mentorship program, and for 5 weeks, I would go through the tools with individuals, and they would do projects, and we would just talk about how it impacted them. And a couple of librarians from Iowa participated. And those tools enabled, those tools enabled them to look at their community with fresh eyes. Now, I don't think anybody had any major changes in how they approached librarianship, but those little tweaks were enabled them to make some small changes that had big impacts. For instance, somebody from Idaho realized that her circulation desk was positioned in such a way that her back was to the door. So she used some grant money to turn the circulation desk around, and that changed the way people felt when they came into the library. They were welcomed. So I say that because I think the information, the things that you're brought through as you do a tool are not earth-shattering. They are small tweaks that you can make that can have a big impact. So much of what we talked about in the tools and what we heard community members talk about was this give and take between libraries and their communities. So I'm going to bring you through, I'm going to show you a couple of tools that will help you focus on community and the resources that you have in your community, because this symbiotic relationship that a library has between themselves and the community is a powerful way to help in times of disaster. And the work you've done beforehand in being responsive to the community positions you to be a very impactful agent of recovery. So I'm excited that this, you've all asked me to be here because I think it's really, really important. The things that you're doing now to build trust, to know the people in your community and let the library and the people who work in the library be known. Build trust and build those connections so that when disaster strikes, you're positioned to call on that person, or they know that the library is a trusted resource. Also, you're able to identify strengths and weaknesses and figure out what needs to be done more quickly when disaster strikes. So this is the toolkit. This is the website for the Rural Libraries and Social Wellbeing Research. And you can see that there are several tabs. If you want to look at the quotes, everything is fully researchable. All of the information, all of the data is available. There are resources, the preprints of papers that will soon be published, policy briefings. You can find descriptions of the places, descriptions of the people on the research team. But what I'm going to take you to is the toolkits. Maybe. There we go. So we've categorized them in belonging, capacity, discovery, self-determination, and wellness. I'm going to focus on belonging, capacity, and wellness. So if you look down, you can see the different titles of the tools. Awakening to community potential would be a really good one to do now and during a disaster. It would be good to think about if you can. Now, all of these tools are self-reflective. So when something hits immediately, I don't expect people to be able to say, oh, I'm going to sit and be self-reflective for a half an hour. But it's a way to sort through your thoughts after things slow down a little bit. So this was written by Eli Ganay, who is the state librarian of New Mexico. But back when we started this research, all of us were, Eli, Margot, and myself, all of the researchers were librarians that worked in support of rural libraries in New York State. So people have moved since and changed jobs, but we all at our heart love rural libraries and wanted to do something that would really make a difference. I mean, we know all of the stories about how rural libraries impact their community, but what we didn't have a lot of at the time was actual data that shows how rural libraries impact their communities. So that's why this research was done. So anyway, this tool, Awakening to Community Potential, asks you to think about somebody in your community, maybe somebody who has a leadership role, but maybe somebody who doesn't. I think it's even more interesting to think about somebody who maybe isn't a politician or the leader of some organization. When the librarian in Igiugig, Alaska went through this, she thought about a mother of somebody who was very quiet and didn't play a big role in the community. And as she thought about this woman, she realized this woman had a huge amount of wisdom and connection, and she just wasn't being asked to join in things. So this is a good way to kind of think about your community with appreciation and notice their strengths. So you go through the questions. In what way does this person you chose currently contribute their talents, skills, and knowledge to the community good? Looking inward, do you notice anything shifting in your own thinking when answering the question above? And then describe what barriers you might have which make it difficult to see the value and potential contributions of each person in your community. So these are ways that you can just think about a person in your community. Most of our tools are about the community as a whole, but this one I like because it is a specific person that you're thinking about. So that's Awakening to Community Potential. Pathways to Belonging Contribution Assessment is thinking about how the library and the community have assets, what they're doing well, what maybe they need to improve on. Pathways to Belonging, to be seen, to feel known. And is everyone welcome at your library? Also great tools. And I worked with 45 people for 5 weeks each individually. And as we went through these tools, is everyone welcome at your library was one of the most popular ones. Everybody got something different. And as you can see, the questions are not, I'll actually go to, is everyone welcome at your library? This is Susan Green from Vermont. Most of our videos or most of our tools have a video introduction to them. The author talks about why they made the tool. And so Susan Green is asking people to look at why the library may not be welcoming to everyone. What are some reasons why people are not currently coming to your library? Look at the data. So there's links to the census website and other resources to actually get the solid numbers on who's in your community, because often we think the community is who walks through the library doors. And when we look at those numbers, sometimes it can be surprising to see, wow, we have a big senior citizen population, or I didn't even know that demographic was in our community. They're kind of hidden. So looking at the numbers is important, but it's also important to ask around and to look and to observe and see and think about the places you might go to find out who's in your community or who's not. Then assessing your practices. Is your circ desk turned in such a way that you can't see people coming in the door? Or do your policies and procedures create a barrier for some people? And then putting it all together. How do you make sense of it all? Now, none of these answers are recorded or kept. So this is completely for your own benefit. And at the bottom of each tool, you can have the results mailed to you. So you can have them, but we don't keep them on our website. So answer honestly, it's just for your benefit. Capacity, there's a great tool on assessing your practices as a library director. Also, if your board needs to hire a library director, this is a good tool for that. And Dare to Dream is a tool about looking at your library space and figuring out if it really meets the needs of your community, and just looking at things with a fresh perspective, fresh eyes. Engaging the community on well-being is a tool that you can use to go out and talk to your community and assess what's needed. And I think that would probably be a really good tool to use before and after a disaster. So that's the community aspect. The wellness tab is the tab that I think would be helpful for people personally, staff, yourself, and community members. Identifying and Preventing Burnout is written by Chelsea Price from Iowa, and she talks about why she wrote it and then takes you through just some questions that you can ask yourself. Under irritability, I feel myself losing my patience and temper more than usual. And then you just click on agree, disagree. None of these answers are recorded, and you're not going to be graded on them or assessed. So it's not going to say, yep, you scored really high, you're burnt out. But I think as you go through these questions, you begin to see a pattern of, wow, I really am irritable, or I am not taking care of my physical body, or I'm feeling kind of depressed. And sometimes just seeing these things is a wake-up call so that you can start to change your approach. And then after you go through these questions, she offers a lot of, oh yeah, this is more assessment. The tool offers some tips and tricks, not tricks, tips for stopping burnout. This is a tool also that most participants did at some point when they were working with me and said that it was very helpful. And also people reported that they use this tool for community members as well, that this is not library specific. The uncertainty tool is a tool that I made, and it is basically thinking through a situation where you don't know the outcome. And certainly we have experienced uncertainty during the pandemic as we were reimagining our roles. But uncertainty comes up all the time. And so it's just nice to have a way to sort through your thoughts and feelings and think about, can somebody help me? Is there something I need to give up? Is there a better way that I can talk to myself through this? How would you talk to a person, your best friend, who's going through this situation, instead of sometimes the negative self-talk that we are sometimes, some of us are prone to do? And when I released this tool out in the world to be evaluated and get feedback, I felt extraordinarily uncertain. So I did the uncertainty tool to deal with my uncertainty about the uncertainty tool, and it helped, but I created it, so I realize I'm probably a little biased. And again, the answers get sent to you. The last tool I just want to briefly mention is Awakening to Community Potential, which is another one done by Chelsea. And she has a beautiful write-up in the beginning about libraries and communities and how we work together. And she talks about seeing community members as resources and that symbiotic relationship that we have with each other, the library and the community. So, whoops, sorry about that. So this is my information, and I am happy to talk with anybody about the tools. And the reason why I put lichens as a photograph in these slides is because lichens are a symbiotic relationship between bacteria and algae, and it's really cool. And I think that's exactly what libraries and their communities do.
That is the nerdiest thing I've heard in a long time.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing these resources, Hope. And I think, one thing that sticks out to me, I mean, in addition to the toolkits as being a super practical thing to sort of keep in your front or back pocket as you're thinking about preparing for this sort of thing, is, one really practical thing you said was, when we think about taking care of ourselves, how would I coach my best friend through this situation? I've never thought of it that way before. And then how can I, rather than just getting down on myself, I would never say that to my friend. I shouldn't say it to myself, but I think that's a really interesting way to handle the situation. We had one person share in the chat that in their town, a group home burnt down. The community really stepped up to help, wondering how we can also support the staff and clients who were impacted by that disaster. And I think some of those sort of community support toolkits could be a great way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And each community is so unique. The resources and the strengths and the needs are very specific to that community. So the toolkits were made with the intention of letting the individuality and uniqueness shine. So we don't say, do it this way, that they did it in New Mexico. We say, this is an example, but do it your way.
I think that's so great, but it also does require sort of time and space and prep on the front end for you to be thinking about that. Bobbi, I'll let you get your slides pulled up here, and I hope we can come back to any questions. We had one person saying, thank you, I had no idea these tools were available. So I'm always glad when we can alert people to new ideas. And we are seeing your slides, Bobbi, but I don't see your video.
Yeah, I'm not going to turn my video on when I'm talking.
Okay.
When I have two screens, and so it can look like I'm not paying attention to myself, but I also find it a little bit distracting.
Okay.
So I'm happy to turn it on at the Q&A part, but I don't usually have it on when I'm presenting.
All right, there we go. Well, we see your slides. Thanks so much.
Thanks. A little bit about me. When Becky reached out and asked me to talk about this topic, I think part of the reason that she reached out to me is that through my work at the network of the National Library of Medicine, I have developed a class, which I'll share a link to at the end of this presentation. It's a 2-week free online asynchronous class called Wellness in the Workplace. And it is aimed at library staff and looking about how we can make our workplaces healthy, and what aspects we should be looking at. And for me, it was really important as I was putting these slides together and also seeing Hope's presentation about burnout, how important it is to have a healthy foundation to build upon if there is a disaster in our area, that we have that sort of groundwork in place. And I'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about some of the recommendations I have. This picture on the slide is the first public library I ever worked at, which is in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. This is the old Carnegie building. It is no longer a public library. I believe it's an extension office for Iowa State University. But I worked here when I was in high school. So I've moved around a lot, but I came back to Iowa about 7 years ago, and I'm happy to be back here. Before I get started, I do want to give a permission slip for my presentation and acknowledge that we are still in the midst of a global pandemic and collective trauma, and I encourage you to prioritize your wellness during my session. Please feel free to doodle, color, knit, to move your body in ways that feel good to you, eat, drink, take a break, or whatever else you need to do to take care of yourself. Your wellness is more important than anything, including this presentation. So when I started looking at how we can take care of ourselves and our communities during disasters, I think it's really important that we start at home. So my slides are out of order. Shoot. Okay, this is a little bit about the network first, and then I'll go out of order. So just for those of you who aren't familiar with the network of the National Library of Medicine, we are an outreach arm of the National Library of Medicine, and our office, Region 6, is housed at the University of Iowa and does outreach to Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. I do work here in Iowa. I'm in Iowa City. Some of my colleagues in my office are in Illinois, Michigan, and other states, and so we're kind of spread around. Okay, so back to this slide. I want to just talk about basically you can't pour from an empty cup. It's hard to take care of your community if you're not taking care of yourself and your staff first. And so it's really important. I would encourage everyone to look at some of the resources I share at the end of this presentation about creating a healthy workplace, because responding to a disaster is going to be a lot easier if you already have some good policies and practices in place. So 4 recommendations for essentially, during the disaster and the initial crisis period, essentially start at home. So if the library is going to be taking care of the community, the first thing they need to do is take care of their own people. Locate staff. Are they safe? Do they and their family have any medical care that they need, housing, food, any other necessities that they might need to take care of themselves during this crisis, and to help the library take care and give back to the community. Some other additional considerations to think of during this time would be that childcare may not be available during this time, and so how can we help staff who need assistance finding care for children or other people in their lives that they're responsible. This is elder care, but it could also be adults who aren't elderly. There's lots of reasons we have people in our care. And then also pets. many people, myself included, consider pets their family. And if my pet was missing or not in a safe place during a disaster, I certainly wouldn't be able to work effectively. As you respond to the disaster, and these are things that you should probably consider now before it happens so that you know how you might respond and what changes you might make in advance. So some things to consider is that the dress code that you have should probably be modified during this response time, that people may be out in their community doing physical work right before or after they come into work. They may not have access to clothes if their living space has been affected by the disaster. So those kind of things. Look at policies surrounding children and family at work. So this sort of ties into what I was talking about on the previous slide, where childcare and care for adults may not be as easily available. How can you make it possible for people to be at the library and helping the community and alleviate any internal stressors that they might have around having their loved ones safe and cared for? And that might be having space at work to have them there. Flexible schedules. So look at how you can let people come in early or leave early or be gone during the day as needed. Again, taking care of your staff and letting them have that freedom can also help them serve the community better. A lot of the resources I looked at and recommendations I saw from organizations include providing additional leave time, both during the initial disaster period and the time after that. So expanding your vacation, sick time, PTO policy. I know during the initial COVID pandemic, there were libraries who were just approving time off requests, and not worrying about whether the people had the time there to take off or that kind of thing. And so how can you ensure people are still receiving their paycheck, but also getting the time away that they need? And how do you add additional time, especially in a time of disaster? And the other thing to think about is that not everyone has the same capacity or the ability during an event to step up and provide services to the community or to each other. That everybody's capacity is a little bit different, and to show grace for people who have less capacity than you do, or that maybe you expect people to have. It's not really any of our business why some people have a lower level of capacity, but just accept that maybe not everyone is contributing at the same way during that time. I think a lot of the research also shows that you need to be prepared to evaluate workloads and priorities, in particular to assess what new tasks that you're taking on are you taking on during this event, either in the immediate after effects of the disaster, or if there's things that you're going to be taking on long term. And then what you're going to need to do is look at what tasks can be suspended. Really, really important for both the well-being of the staff and the community that you know what tasks can be cut or suspended during this time. It's not fair to ask staff to step up and do more during this time when they are also members of the community that have probably been affected by the disaster. So what normal tasks can be suspended during this time or maybe done in a different way. And again, this is where that pre-planning really comes into play, so that you probably aren't going to know now what new tasks you might be asked to take on, but you can certainly go through things that your current tasks and look at what things that could be suspended. And, can this be suspended for a week? Can this be suspended for a month? Could this be suspended indefinitely? That kind of thing. And then going back to the burnout that Hope touched on, I talk a lot about this as part of the wellness class. And one of the contributing factors in general to burnout at work is a lack of autonomy over our the tasks that we're being asked to create and the work that we're doing. And so, especially during this time when emotions and people and stressors are high, empowering staff to make decisions about their time and their capacity during this time is really important. And again, this is where, if you've laid the groundwork with some of the other foundations for a healthy workplace, that this will be a lot easier to do. So there's some ways that you can prioritize managing stress. You're not going to get rid of it, right? But there's some things that we can do. One, bring in mental health professionals to talk to the library staff as a group. So group meetings with health professionals, maybe one time, but maybe ongoing if it's depending on the disaster and the fallout from that and the after effects from that. Really, I always like to remind people of the employee assistance programs. If you contact your employee assistance program voluntarily, sometimes it's mandated as part of a performance improvement plan, but if you do it on your own, it is confidential. And you can have access to all kinds of resources through that, including help with mental health care, well-being, but also there are resources there for physical well-being and other kinds of services related to your well-being. So do take advantage of your EAP, and also for supervisors to just regularly remind staff that EAP is there and it is helpful for them. Acknowledging that we're all stressed out and the importance of taking care of our mental health can really help people take advantage of these kind of programs, but also address their mental health troubles before they become too severe. Allowing staff to share their experiences. This can be beneficial. You don't want to turn work necessarily into a group therapy session, but to acknowledge that there are struggles that are happening outside of the library that are making our jobs, our day-to-day, being there for our jobs, being present, contributing is really important, and allowing staff to share those experiences can be very beneficial. And then making space for decompressing, and I talk about this at length when I talk about wellness in the workplace. There's so many reasons that we need to have some private space at work to decompress. From interactions with patrons to interactions with other staff members, just background noise, that kind of thing. And so when I talk about making space here, what I'm talking about is physical space. So a place that staff can go that's nice, aesthetically pleasing, to have some alone time, to have some quiet time, to process their feelings and reactions without being observed, but also making space for that in a non-physical way, so that it's acceptable to take time to process your feelings and emotions and step away from your desk, that people are expected to do this, that we understand why people do this, that this is the culture in this library, that there are no martyrs here, right? That everyone takes care of themselves. Some things to consider during the recovery period. There's a lot out there, and then again, I have a lot of resources at the end. So you have your initial disaster and maybe the immediate after effects of that, but then the recovery period can last up to 6 months to a year after that initial crisis has passed. And it's important to remember that this is also part of the disaster fallout. I think sometimes a lot of us, myself included, when there's any type of event or disaster, you sort of have the event and then the immediate fallout, and then it's sort of like, okay, now we're moving on. But there's a lot of things that still happen during that recovery time. So this is for both us as individuals and also as supervisors to be prepared for a lot of feelings. That there's an initial sort of adrenaline rush or drive to get a immediate response to disasters, and we don't have time to really process things until afterwards. And so some of the long-term fallout can look like depression and anxiety, but also cynicism about the community, about your job, about reaction times and support maybe that we saw. I know sometimes when there's an immediate, I'm trying not to name an immediate disaster because I don't want to trigger somebody's past event. But sometimes we're not receiving the support either in the state or nationally, or the recognition about our disasters that we would like to see. Just in general, having strong emotions or reactions to circumstances. So maybe a usually heightened response to something that while prior to the event might have been annoying, but now our response is, anger or extreme frustration with that. And then interpersonal conflict. So even people who have the best intentions when they're stressed and anxious just aren't performing at their best with interpersonal reactions. And so do expect an increase in interpersonal conflict and be prepared for dealing with that. Have systems in place to address interpersonal conflict head on and early on. I know sometimes as Midwesterners, that's not our style, but it definitely helps improve that specific instance, but the overall morale of the workplace long-term as well. For supervisors specifically, creating a culture where staff feel comfortable sharing about the challenges they're experiencing, that, you know, people, it's okay to talk about your mental health struggles and to seek help for those, and you know, to take time off work during the day if we need to see a therapist or to see, you know, something like that's a norm and expected, and we talk about that. Continue the flexible scheduling and leave policy that you put in place during the disaster. Again, as we talked about all these fallouts, that people may just need extra time away. They may need extra time away to deal with physical things, but they may also have emotional responses that they just need alone time to decompress and deal with. And then know what resources are available to staff, both through your employer, so EAP again, or if there's resources available in the community or in the state or even nationally that could be taken advantage of. But one thing you're going to want to do during this period is reflect on the disaster itself and how the library responded. And it's really important during this process to have input from everyone and that people feel comfortable speaking freely. So, you know, what went right and wrong during the, you know, the initial responses. What would you do differently? You know, we would do this, but we would tweak it this way, that kind of thing. And then what can you do to prepare for future disasters? And so, again, this is why that laying that groundwork and having a healthy work environment prior to any type of an event is really important. There's so much about self-care out there. I really, it's not something I talk a lot about in my presentations, but one of the things I like to remind people is that self-care doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be a lengthy process. Remembering to drink enough water and get enough sleep is self-care. Preparing a meal or buying a meal that you find delicious is self-care. Your hobbies, you know, those kind of things, learning something new are self-care. This is also a time where you might want to curate your social media followings. So one of my acts of self-care is to regularly unfollow accounts that I have followed because I think they're interesting or the news they're sharing is interesting, but results in news showing up in a social media account I use for relaxing. And that's not relaxing, right? You know, you're getting this today, the Supreme Court decided blah, blah, blah. That's not relaxing in a social media account I'm using in that way. So there's other ways to get that news, right? I also really like to highlight this program that SAMHSA had a couple of years ago that was adopted from some research. And I think it's really important to look at the different things that encompass our health or are part of our health and well-being. You probably don't necessarily have control over all of these at all the time. Our finances especially sometimes are a little out of our control right now with inflation and things like that. But there are other aspects of our health and wellness that we have a little bit more control over. So your emotional well-being, what the environment and the space around you looks like. Spiritual is not religious, but a sense of purpose and belonging, you know, that kind of thing can contribute to your overall well-being. And it's also important not to neglect any of these, you know, when you're looking at yourself and assessing how you can feel better. So now is the point. I only had about 20 minutes, so I included a lot of resources. The slides are available, so you can take advantage of them. And feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or comments or other things, but I want to run down some of the resources that I think are particularly helpful. One of which is the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. I really love this one because it helps us understand any supplements or herbs we might be taking and how they interact with prescription medications, evaluating those resources online, and just knowing and understanding the science behind that resource. The Surgeon General, I think in October now, because we're in December, I was going to say last month, but released this framework for workplace mental health and well-being. It's available online. I love this. We're actually working on a class, a 1-hour webinar based on this and the SAMHSA guidelines. This is a great place to look at just creating a healthy workplace. The World Health Organization also has a really great free toolkit on workplace stress. So again, this is what things you can look at prior to a disaster and sort of preparation. Medline Plus is the free resource on health information that's available from the National Library of Medicine. I really like this as a go-to resource. One of my favorite things about it is that any resource that's been linked to off of Medline Plus has been vetted by a librarian already. So you can feel confident using that for yourself or for your patrons. And if you use the print function on the page itself, it will convert hyperlinks into a URL for that printout, which is really nice. Excuse me, I mentioned this class that we offer that's free. You can sign up for that as well. These are some resources I think I pulled out specifically for SAMHSA about helping your community, including teens and children and people after a traumatic event, and some additional resources and resources for supervisors. So that's it for me. Just want to remind everyone, if you're not familiar with the network, that we do provide free education and outreach. We do provide funding for health initiatives. So if you're interested in that, reach out. We also provide free printed materials related to health information and the sponsorship of the CHIS certification. And I will hand it back over to Samantha.
Thank you, Bobbi. So many little suggestions there that I think are, good things to be thinking about now while we are in planning mode, but then also great things to have in mind. Again, some really practical things like, does your staff have childcare after a disaster that you want to be thinking about as well? Okay, and our next guest, and Karen, you're going to want to hit swap slideshow and presenter view under display settings. Our next guest is Karen Hyatt, and Karen is with the Department of Health and Human Services Disaster Behavioral Health Team. So Karen, I will let you start the share. And you're also welcome to turn your video on here.
Is this showing or?
There it's showing, yeah.
All right. And it's full screen because, yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, hello, everybody.
But I don't see your video if you do want to turn that on.
Oh, you don't? Yes. There we go.
Yep, now I see you. Wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. My name is Karen Hyatt, and I work for the Department of Health and Human Services. Our legacy Department of Human Service, and we're calling it Legacy IDPH, have combined. I serve also every state in the United States, and all of our territories have a designated person who serves as that state's disaster behavioral health coordinator. And I serve in that role for Iowa, and I have for quite a while now, almost 15 years. And I will talk a little bit about how that role impacts what we're doing to help people across Iowa. And I really enjoyed the presentations, and I got lots of ideas of how we can partner better in the future with the library system. I love my library. I go to my library every week and get like 3 or 4 books. I literally wouldn't know what to do without my library card. So there we go. So Iowa has established, and I'm the person who administers this for Iowa. We have a volunteer disaster behavioral health response team. We call it DBART just because it's wordy. 5 other states in the United States have teams similar to ours. It is a trained team of people who we can mobilize to provide post-disaster mental health services across the state. We do this in an organized kind of response to communities, individuals, family members, other responders who have also been affected. And I would add, on top of what Bobbi said, that the recovery period she's right. Like, it's not just the event itself, right? With Duratio, we're still responding to that. And that's been several years. So recovery does take a long time, and we want to make sure that we're providing or offering communities mental health support during the entire process and not just at the beginning of the event. Who is members of our volunteer behavioral response team? We have it right now around 226 members from across the state. And we believe that if you're interested, you can be trained. And these are just some of the backgrounds of people that we have. But I think the last bullet is the most important one, which is we look for people who are reflecting the community where they live. And across the state, because it does look different. And so you don't have to be a licensed mental health provider. You don't have to be a social worker to be a very effective member of our disaster behavioral health response team. We do provide training. Not only do we provide disaster behavioral health training, but we do psychological first aid, mental health first aid, compassion fatigue, disasters and substance use. There's a whole host of trainings that we offer to help people feel prepared so that when they are asked to respond to a specific disaster event, they feel capable to do so. And I think that's the key to having a really great team. What are the things that we do? We don't go in uninvited. So people have to invite the team in, and I'll tell you in a little bit like how you do that. But what the services are that we do provide, it's sort of a psychoeducation, peer on the ground support for people in whatever environment that is. We've gone to all kinds of different environments. We engage in supportive listening. That's one of the key things that people can provide. You do that all the time, working at the libraries. And so it's using those skills to really listen to where people are at and to find out what it is that they need. And then screening people by listening to find out what do they need long-term? How can we hook them into community-based services? What's the best way to get the person the help that they need? And then trying to ensure a referral that's appropriate to those mental health services, because it is complicated and the network is vast. And sometimes our community-based services are impacted as well. When the tornadoes hit in Marshalltown, for example, we did a lot of on-the-ground support and counseling there. We went to a lot of daycare centers, met with parents. And then when the Community Mental Health Center, Center Associates, was back up and running, when their staff were back to work, we pulled out. So they invited us in to support until they were ready to take over their normal role in the community, and we were happy to do that. So some examples of our response for DBART. People can request our services through their community emergency manager, the Iowa National Guard. We've done support for them. Homeland Security Emergency Management has a 24-hour duty officer number. You can call there and ask for DBART services, and then they get a hold of me. You can contact me directly. A lot of people just come to me direct, and I set up the service. But we also partner with community mental health centers, mental health and disability service regions, and really anybody that is in the community who sees, it could be you, right? You might have a situation where you feel you want some additional expertise to help you. We don't come in and supplant you, right? We come in and support whoever it is that's asking us to come in. I always say we don't wear capes and we don't show up uninvited. And if any of our team does that, they only do it once, right? Because we take that very seriously, that we're there to support what's already happening in the community. We do a lot of this. Death by accident, such as a car accident, tractor, hunting. Last year there was a hunting death, and we were asked to get the hunting team together. There were about 20 people who had been hunting together when somebody had died. And we did kind of a blended service for them. We did a diffusion, we did a debriefing, we got all the information out so that everybody knew all the same information. And it was really helpful to them to have that opportunity to do that in a kind of an organized setting. I was leery of it, you know, because I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it went really well and they were very appreciative. And then, of course, all the natural weather elements that happen in Iowa. Hailstorm damage is very significant at times. You know, we've had flooding, tornadoes, we have drought. You know, what hasn't Iowa had in the last couple of years? And then school violence and suicide. We do provide support to schools, to parents. The AEA crisis team also goes in and supports schools. We have partnered with them on many, many occasions where maybe they can't get there on the day that the school is asking. So our team will go and then pass the torch to them when they can be there, or they go for 3 days and they feel like there's still something that needs to happen and they can't really stay any longer. Then we come in and take it from there and go a little bit forward. So we cater what our response is into what the need is in any of these examples. And sometimes these things are happening all at once. So that's a little bit about DBART. We also right now are running a project that was initially funded by FEMA and SAMHSA called COVID Recovery Iowa. And then when the tornadoes hit in Marshalltown, we changed the name to Project Recovery Iowa to include all of the different disasters that were going on, because we were responding in many ways to all of those. So federally, when there's a presidentially declared disaster for individual assistance, then that opens up this crisis counseling, assistance, and training program funding. And I'm the person in Iowa who writes the grants for this funding. And then I administer that money through providers after the fact. And I always write, there's 2 grants. There's a short-term disaster grant called the Immediate Service Program, or ISP. And then I write another grant that's called the Regular Service Program, which is just extended based on whatever that event is. During the pandemic, I wrote the grant in March of 2020. We went live in May of 2020, and I'm still running that same grant. We started off with, I think, 75 full-time staff that were working for Project Recovery Iowa, and now we have like 53, we're almost in our 3rd year, you guys, and we're going through June, and I don't know if it will end there or not. It just really depends on what our numbers look like and what the need is out in the community. So we partner federally. We get the funding in from FEMA. SAMHSA is our project officer. I met every week with FEMA and SAMHSA for almost about 2.5 years, and let them know what was going on, what we were seeing in the state of Iowa. And they were really good partners for us. Our federal project officers from Iowa. And so we're really always fortunate to get somebody who cares about the state. The Department of Health and Human Services, we contract with providers. Here's a list of the providers that we contracted for our pandemic grant. All of these providers are still with us, except for Pathways Behavioral Services stopped in August because their review of their own agency was they were short-staffed, right? And so they didn't have the ability to continue on with us because the staff that they had hired, they needed for internal business, and we certainly understand that. But they were with us for a good 2+ years. We don't have to do an RFP like a lot of state departments have to do at a time of disaster, because our governor puts an emergency procurement statements in place, which allows us then to contract more quickly and without going through that process, which can be a lengthy period of time. We had this pandemic grant up and running within 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2nd week, we had hired 55 FTEs. So it was really fast moving, and a lot of moving parts have to go into this that we prepare for in advance, so that when a disaster hits, we're ready to go. And that's part of what my job is. This is very small. I know you're going to get a copy of the PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you what our numbers look like, how many people we've served. It's a little over 1 million. It's 1,093,154 people to date. I don't have the last 2 months in these numbers, but as you can see, they've been pretty consistent, and we've done a lot of different kinds of services, whether it was in-person contact, one-on-one counseling through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or in person, a lot of networking, personal support groups, mailed out a lot of material. And then this is just some additional information. We did 27,262 individual counseling sessions. The 33,201 individual encounters means that the person had a conversation, or they talked with that individual maybe up to 30 minutes, but it didn't evolve into what we would consider an individual counseling session. And then the brief educational and supportive context is anything kind of less than that. So it's an engagement, it's a conversation, it's something that occurred that was less than that period of time. And then we've done a lot of group sessions and a lot of group counseling, and people are still showing up for our group sessions. Some are parenting, some are people who don't have homes. Excuse me, some are people who have experienced domestic violence in the last couple of years. We have secure sites for those where nobody just can pop in off the public on the domestic violence. They have to ask us to join that group. We try to keep that like a safe environment for people. But just kind of shows you a little bit about some of the things that we've done. And we worked with some libraries. Franklin Library here in Des Moines has opened up their training rooms. They have great conference rooms all across the state, the libraries. And we've done sessions there on anxiety, stress reduction. I think they're doing a holiday stress at a library coming up very soon. And I've attended some of those, and people come. At the one I went to at the Franklin Library, it was geared for older adults. And there were quite a few people there, like the first 3 rows, had a lot of people because it's a natural place where older adults like to go. And so it makes sense to offer sessions there, and we appreciate it when we're allowed to do that. The other thing we did early on, when the libraries were kind of in that period of, are they going to be open? Are they going to be closed? Can people get books online? How is that going to look? I know I really appreciated the bags that the libraries, some of them put together with just these random books you could go and pick up and just read whatever was in the kit. But we did with a couple nursing homes where we were hearing there was isolation, and this was in northern Iowa, in rural area. The library helped us. One of our counselors set it up with the librarian, and books were actually sent to the nursing home, and some of the residents read the book and they came together in a Zoom platform and then talked with each other about how they felt about the book. And that was really, I thought that was a really great example of how we can work together with libraries. And I think that it was very meaningful to those individuals that got to do that. I'd love to do more of that. We haven't done any of that lately, but this was pretty much in the beginning, I think 2021 when this happened. I just wanted to share with you some examples of how we've tried to work with the libraries across the state. And we always find that you guys are always like really great to work with and know a lot of the same people that we know that we're trying to help provide service to. And then these are just, I know I'm almost out of time. I'll go through this very, very quickly. This is just some of the age of the demographic of the people that have reached out to us, and those numbers I just showed you. You will get a copy of this. But the top risk categories, past substance and mental health problems, past trauma, prolonged separation from the family. There's been quite a bit of that in Iowa, especially for people who work in fields where they didn't feel they could go home after they'd been working because they didn't want to pass on COVID if they had it. And people are still doing this because we still have people who are dying in hospitals. It's not over yet. And so we still have to be careful of our community members and those that are vulnerable to whether it's the flu or COVID. RSV is really rampant right now too. So we're doing like a virtual Santa, and a lot of kids who have RSV or they have intellectual or developmental disabilities where they're in a compromised state. They're going and having like 15-20 minutes with Santa, not to find out what they want for Christmas, because we're not doing that, but it's like, what do you want to know about the reindeer? What do you like about the elves? What do you want to know what Santa likes? You know, what his favorite meal is? It's really just a conversation that the kids get to have one-on-one with Santa. And then isolation and withdrawal, being anxious and fearful, fatigue and exhausted. I'm sure some of you are fatigued and exhausted. There's days when I know we all feel like that. We have to take care of ourselves. So I really appreciate the things that Bobbi said earlier on the importance of self-care. And then we have a fairly strong media presence in a pandemic grant. People don't come to you, right? You got to put the word out and they have to see it somehow, trust it, and come to you. And so we tried really hard to have every door open in any way that somebody might find a way to access services. So we have 3 different hotlines. The Iowa Warm Line is 24/7, run by people who are in recovery themselves from mental health. They're called peer support specialists. The Iowa Concern Line is run by Iowa State University Extension. They have a strong rural presence. And we hired them specifically to have an ag and rural presence. So we have a team that comes directly from them that works in rural Iowa. And we also have a team from the University of Iowa Center for Development and Disability who have catered our programs and training, and they've worked this whole time specifically with people with developmental or intellectual disabilities. And then we have a Spanish line because we were asked to do that early on because there were a lot of people who, especially in northern Iowa, who were working in the meatpacking plants. Although there's like 57 languages at some of these plants, we were asked to put a Spanish line in place, and then we have done that. And that is that.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to all of our presenters. I've seen some things in the chat, you know, folks saying, I didn't know this existed. So what wonderful resources from you all. Thank you so much. We do have one question specifically about pets. Has anyone worked with any groups that are part of keeping pets safe during and after disasters? If you want to address that quick.
I know that we are in Iowa, many different entities, whether it's the animal rescue leagues across the state. There's an association, a federal association that comes in and helps train people on how to take care of pets in advance. What is the plan? Just like we ask people to create a plan for themselves. You know, what medication do you need to bring? Do you have a wheelchair? Does anyone know how to change, you know, the tire on your wheelchair? All those kinds of things we have training for. Pets are huge. And also pets are been a huge part of our recovery because we use therapy pets. Even on Zoom, it works. And we have dogs on our team, which I'm pretty excited about. They have little vests with badges for both of our grants.
Bobbi, do you want to talk about the links you're putting into chat?
Yeah, I just dropped 3 links into chat. The first one from the CDC is really great on putting, and it includes a link to putting together a toolkit for your pet during a disaster. So this is caring for your own pets. Ready.gov is a website from the government, HSS, about preparing for disasters, and they also have a page on pets. And then I'll grab the Humane Society one too. The ASPCA and the Humane Society have some really great resources as well.
Thank you for those links.
And if anybody's interested in like some of the committee work that's happening around safety of pets, please let me know and I'd be happy to hook you up.
Oh, wonderful. I wonder, Bobbi, if you can address a little bit, you know, I heard in a webinar I attended at some point in the pandemic, you know, you can't yoga your way out of a bad situation, right? But on the other hand, some of those small self-care things really do go a long way. And I have a feeling part of this would be, you know, seek the help of a mental health professional. But can you talk a little bit about, you know, kind of small things of self-care, but when to recognize and how to recognize, you know, there might be a bigger issue here for you and your staff?
Yeah, when I give a longer presentation on self-care and wellness and mindfulness that's directed at caring for ourselves, One, it's not a presentation I like to give, but it's one I get asked to do a lot because self-care is so complicated. A couple of things to keep in mind. We just have a short time, so I won't go too far down this road. Self-care as we know it today and how we talk about it was first written about by Audre Lorde, who was a queer Black woman who was diagnosed with cancer for the second time and spent her life doing civil rights work. So it comes from a deep place where self-care was deeply, deeply important to her mental well-being. Also the Black Panther Party and the movement and the work that they were doing. So there's a real history there, but it's $1 trillion industry right now, right? So it's so hard to talk about. And that's why I really like to stress that the things that you can do for self-care are free and that you're taking care of your basic needs. Yes, you cannot self-care or pizza party your way or whatever out of real trauma. And I just can't encourage people enough to seek help and to normalize talking about our mental well-being at work, with our friends, with our family, whatever. And I think there are a lot of resources out there, a lot of hotlines that are out there. I have a whole list of resources on mental health and wellness that I published on our blog. In the middle of the pandemic, we're still hearing mental health is a huge thing from our members, and we're working on some classes around that. So I would just, take whatever lifeline you can get. If you see a number that in the moment, call that number. There's no one perfect right way to get help. Get help in the way that works best for you, but get help. And
Absolutely.
nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong with getting help.
And can I just want to add to that, I love that you said self-care is free, because we do a lot of anxiety reduction and self-care sessions. So I'm going to get with you to talk about maybe doing some blended stuff, but they're very well attended. And we thought we'd do them for a month, and we're still doing them. And it's been workplaces from all around the state. And we are hearing about workplace fatigue, and it's a real situation. And I think that people, whether it's music or, myself, sometimes I sit here like a troll over my, my keyboard, and I don't take 15 minutes to just go walk around or take a lunch that, we all should do, right? And we all do that. And so the wording starts with us. Like, let's not just talk about self-care because people just roll their eyes, right? Like, let's model it. Let's show it within ourselves, and let's use the right words around it. And the wording around personal support and care, we changed the wording in our Project Recovery Iowa, which is free support and counseling. That's what we do, to personal support. And when we changed it to personal support, like if you go on our website, you can click like, I'm a veteran, or I want help with parenting or older adults activities, whatever it is on our website, you can obtain that. But when we changed the wording to personal support, we had more people coming to the service. And so I do think wording starts with all of us and how we present things and how we let people know things are available.
Hope, I have another question, and I will watch the chat here in our last 10 minutes, but I'm wondering, in any of your work, if you've seen any libraries undertake sort of community memory projects around a shared trauma, and how that has kind of informed the recovery process. So maybe it was a tornado or a hurricane or something, and a library sort of served as a gathering post or a central archive.
That's a great question. Specifically around some trauma, I have not seen that in the libraries that I've worked with, but the library in Igiugig, Alaska did start to interview community residents. I think they used My Story, Jerry Ann Huntley, Storybridge. I don't know. So there are resources out there that can help with that, but that's a wonderful idea.
Samantha, and there might be somebody on from Council Bluffs, but I know that one of the things that the Council Bluffs library helped with back in, when the flooding, so at the end of 2018-19, people came to the library and they talked about their experiences, and then those words and those statements that were put together of what people had experienced went into a mural that was placed in Council Bluffs that's still there today. And then, so that was definitely a community partnership. The library was included in that. The other thing that some of the libraries have helped us with are these legacy trainings that we're doing, which is helping people, older adults specifically, who are in nursing homes and feeling isolated, to tell their story. So I really appreciated like the story slides that Hope was talking about earlier. But then putting that together into a framework to give back to that individual after they've told their story, so that they can give it to their family or whoever they want to give it to, so that it's written down. And so there's been some great partnerships around older adults legacy with some of the libraries. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And Bobbi, you have a link from NNLM as well on this.
Yeah, the All of Us program at the network worked with StoryCorps, the NPR program, to put together toolkits that libraries can use. So it doesn't have a way to record it, but it does have some guidance there. I think Hope put in a tool.
And Hope has the StoryBridge, our storybridge.org link as well. So I guess I would just, we'll wrap up here now. I haven't seen other questions come through, but I want to say thank you to all three of our panelists today for the work that they've done on these important topics. And to all of, I also want to say thank you to all of our library staff who are here, because they care about supporting their staff and their community and taking care of themselves as well. So a round of applause to all of us today, but especially to Karen and Bobbi and Hope for presenting. Our slides from all three of our panelists are available in Iowa Learns as attachments, so you can download and access those there. And I hope you guys can see in the chat all the thank you notes that are coming through. Very appreciative. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we look forward to connecting with you again next time.